This is a One More Mosh Pit production.
We're back today. We're continuing the Donner Party story here on Horrible History Abridged. I'm Zach.
And I'm Stephanie.
And things got kind of bad last time in the story, but this is where we get into why we remember this story today and why it's a common reference to something terrible.
We had a few deaths last time. We had a murder and all that, but
that's any given day back in the,
exactly. That wasn't
in some places.
They weren't
still
in the shit yet.
But I guess I'm just gonna jump right back into it right here, waste no time. When we left you, the Donner Party had made it to Truckee Lake, and they didn't know it, but Truckee Lake would later be called Donner Lake. Mm-hmm. And also they didn't know that some of them at least would be camping out there for a little bit.
Wouldn't it suck to be an area so mundane that your only claim to fame is one time the Donner Party stopped here?
Right.
Wasn't it around here that the Donner Party got snowbound?
What was the Donner Party?
They were a party of settlers in covered wagon times. They got snowbound one winter in the mountains. They had to resort to cannibalism in order to stay alive.
You mean they ate each other up?
They had to, in order to survive.
Don't worry, Mom. I know all about cannibalism. I saw it on TV.
It was late October, and wintry weather didn't usually hit this stretch of the trail until late November. However, snowfall began on October 7th, and the party could already spy mountain ranges and stuff that were white-capped and moving downward.
Yeah, that was the Sierra Nevadas, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Sounds beautiful.
So some people were looking at it and going, huh? Hold on.
Yeah.
It would, at least on the lower peaks, not the ones that maybe, say, stay perma-snow-capped and stuff. I've been in a lot of places that stay snow-covered because of the elevation. But
yeah, I mean, I went to Alaska once, and it's pretty crazy to see as a poor little redneck Southern girl from Arkansas, these huge mountains that you usually only see on the television.
Right.
They're pretty amazing, but I wouldn't want to come across them whenever I'm, on my way, like, across the country, traveling by foot or wagon or whatever.
Yeah, coming up upon it and not looking through a windshield.
Yeah, like, oh, God.
Advance effort teams were stifled by freak snowfall, so like they were going to try to take off.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they were stifled by freak snowfall. While they slept, a Herculean blizzard came through.
Wow.
Must have been bad. One member awoke and began screaming. He could not see anyone else in the snowy sea that obscured everyone. He thought the rest had abandoned him during his slumber. The advance team would have no other choice but to turn back. The Donner Party would settle at Truckee Lake. It came on so quickly and so severely that it buried them.
Yeah, and then they just turned around and went back the other way. Did they not think that it might be like traveling the same, the storm might be like...
They didn't know a fucking thing about weather patterns.
That was a silly question.
This isn't the crew from Twister or anything like that. These aren't astute people. They're dumb.
Well, they don't have the Weather Channel that teaches them things like this. And,
right. I mean, yeah, they have some ideas of some things, but like this, I'll explain more about this winter in particular, but a lot of perchance things hurt them as well as their own dumb mistakes.
Yeah, it's very much like a movie, like just one of those stupid comedy movies that are just a series of people doing dumb shit.
The comedy of errors.
Yeah, and they're so annoying because you just want to say, hey, as an outsider, you're being real stupid, but they don't usually die in movies.
I found this story and I had to put it in there. In November of 1846, William Eddy borrowed a rifle from William Foster because, we only had like 3 names back then. And he killed a 900-pound grizzly bear.
God damn. And you...
He would wound it, evade its attacks while reloading this fucking flintlock rifle, ramrod, and packing it. He'd shoot it again, and then he would perform the coup de grace with a tree branch.
Oh my God. William Eddy is a badass. Holy shit.
And like, he did this daring act while he was not doing so well.
Yeah, for real. He was already like malnourished and weak, and I mean, he sounds like maybe he was beyond the point of tired and exhaustion, and he was like full on crackhead, delirious.
And it was a 900-pound grizzly bear, and it provided a lot of meat for a while, a lot of food for him.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know, he was seconds away loading that old rifle from like being like the Revenant.
Yeah, I've never seen that movie.
All I know is I know the story, and the guy got attacked by a bear.
Yeah, that is based on a true story, isn't it? Forgot about that.
The winter that straddled the transition from 1846 to 1847 was one of the coldest winters ever recorded in the Western Hemisphere, and the Donner Party would be far from the only ones that felt its brunt. This same winter would claim the lives of roughly 600 Mormons in Nebraska. It was the main contributing factor to the Irish potato famine that would kill over 1 million. The Columbia River in Oregon ceased to flow as it had frozen solid.
Holy shit.
So freak winter.
It was like an ice age, like a one-season ice age. That's insane.
The winter would bring 10 blizzards the party's way. Snow was 20 feet deep in places. The elements made shelter a must. While some began building, others searched for pre-existing structures. The Breens, the largest family involved, lucked into finding an abandoned cabin.
Wow, lucky them.
Folks like the Fosters and Eddies built cabins that used large rocks as fourth wall, and as many as 16 people would inhabit these little structures. 3/4 of the party settled by Truckee Lake, while the Donners, their employees, and the remainder of the other quarter set up 5 miles away at Alder Creek.
You know, I know this is a hot take, but stories like this make me almost a little thankful for global warming. I mean...
Yeah. Yeah, it will. You'll feel cold a little bit here. And
I do.
You'll be like, man, I'm glad the winters are more mild, even though we're trading like
thanks, CFCs.
We're trading with other people's time. It's going to be more pleasant for us. And that's the name of the game, isn't it?
I know. I do feel guilty, you know. That
Fuck you, I got mine.
Could be our grandkids or great-grandkids one day having to deal with this horror.
I hope this bit doesn't like age badly. Like, that's a lot of hubris to think like I can keep burning resources and it's going to last for my time.
Yeah.
I'm not going to see the consequences of it. Yeah, we're being real cocky in a Russian roulette game as like humanity, where we're like we're talking shit and we don't know how many chambers we're away from the round.
No, I don't feel cocky about it. I feel like shit about it. I feel like there's nothing we can do about it. So
you're one person.
I'm one person. There's literally nothing I can do.
One powerless person.
I know. I'm so powerless. I'm so impotent in my abilities to make change in the world. It's very sad.
Like, we can destroy the world. I just want to be the one that makes that call, you know? Mm-hmm. While repairing the family's broke-down wagon, George Donner, and this is where his name begins to ring in infamy out into the annals of time. This is where things start getting particularly bad for the Donners, especially.
Kind of gross.
Yeah, it's going to be real gross.
It's going to be pretty gross.
Well, George Donner, the family's wagon had broke down, and he was going down to repair it, like pop a wheel back on or whatever. I don't know anything about wagon repair, but he cut his hand pretty bad, but he downplayed it.
He's just like one of the guys in a zombie movie that covers up his wound.
Yeah, being a tough guy don't help you out a whole lot in these situations, you'll find. He downplayed the severity of this cut that would eventually become infected, become gangrenous, and eventually render his arm like completely useless.
Wow. Talk about dead weight.
But like he persevered through like many arduous tasks after with just one arm, while his otherwise helpless family looked on. They're depicted as like George Donner, who's, you know, a strong man of his times, and then it's his wife Tamsin, his doting wife Tamsin, and then just like a useless glut of others that like just stood by while their father was like trying to cut and pick up firewood with one fucking arm.
Do you think his wife was really very doting? She was probably like, you deserve this, you son of a bitch. I told us to turn around and you wouldn't let us.
You'll find at the end of the story that, she was at least a little doting.
It's just a very funny thing to imagine. Nobody knows he's been cut. So he's gradually becoming more and more.
No, it's just not as hiding it. Like,
No,
he's not concealing it like it's
he
The Walking
downplayed
Dead.
it. No, but he downplayed it. Everybody knew he had a cut, but like he downplayed its severity. So like he's getting sick, and you know they're like, hey man, you don't look so hot, and he's like, I'm fine, but he's like all pale and like sweating and like can't use one arm, and he's like, I'm fine, just.
I've done similar shit to this, like
You do
no-selling something like
you
it's
do
good.
this shit
And
like very frequently.
Try to quickly recount a story because this thing's all tangents. Because we've got off track so many times. It's fun though.
It is.
My mom describes a time whenever my pappy went out and was like cutting wood and like took like an errant swing as one does, or you know, accidentally let loose, hit flat side, and it bounced back up and like hit him in the face. And he finished splitting wood or whatever, brought whatever in and was coming in. And like mom was young, so like I know this is like embellished like crazy, but being a little kid, he walked in and she said he walked in and I swear to you, from like his hairline down to like his eyebrow, it looked like his skin was laid over. It probably was fucking laid over, and blood had run. It looked like he'd cut off part of his face.
Holy shit.
And I imagine he did like I did and like laid it back up there and hoped for the best.
Said give daddy a kiss.
I have fingers that shouldn't be there. Like,
gross.
I'll come from a long line of men no-selling huge problems.
The stories that your mom tells about her dad are so ridiculously like cartoonish, and
they are. Be there for one. They are cartoonish.
Some of the shit he's done is just like, how are any of you here?
Like, you just look at it in these stories as like a very profane Popeye with like tobacco juice going down his cheek.
But he gets in, it's like a Lampoon's Vacation movie. Like he's like Chevy Chase, like all the ridiculous, outlandish, over the top bullshit. It's really happening. It has happened.
Me, for instance, I've done my own dental work several times and stuff like that. There's a lot of it's less you're tough and more like, oh, this is a problem I don't want to deal with, and maybe if I ignore it, it'll go away. Well, it didn't go away for George Donner, unfortunately. George's brother and his family was with them, but by all accounts, Jacob was frail and had been sickly most of his life. Not a frontier guy. He wasn't really up to the task and the workload of this trip, let alone the unforeseen circumstances.
So he didn't like have his own family or anything?
He did.
Oh, he did? Had a wife and kids?
He did. The Donners struggled to build a cabin, but the snowfall proved to be too formidable, impeded any real progress in construction. They resorted to temporary tents that would turn out to be a little more permanent. They would make like these tent structures. Some of them would make these crude lean-tos. The bachelors and the hired help were left out in the elements. Housing the many children was a big enough task. Of the 81 in the party, half were children. Their children were exploited for work in this time, I'm sure you know, but like they were so much at this time that like 5 years before this, there was like landmark legislature that like limited children to a 10-hour workday.
God, oh my God.
So to give you an idea, so like people were pumping them out like as a workforce, and
I know.
Also the child mortality rate was high, so people hedged their bets.
God. I know. All of this, everybody knows all of these facts. God, every time you hear them, like it's just
here's some of this stuff and think about it with, carrying your offspring and all that and your family through this, and think about it that way. And think about what a hassle that, and think about how much a handful your kids can be in our cushy circumstances. The Breens were traveling with 7 children, and they were one of these people that hedged their bets and like, we want to have some left over after the rickets.
Yeah.
Every one of them carried to term and into full personhood.
Full personhood, yeah.
Franklin Graves would decide to take charge. This is another, I don't know, this is our Daryl Dixon. I don't know. This is a pretty tough guy here. Pretty important to the story. Makes some shit happen. Franklin Graves would decide to take charge of the situation. Resources were dwindling down to absolutely nothing, and he was tired of watching the faces of his family grow ever more gaunt with each passing day. He would plan an escape mission where a small crew would try to reach Johnson Ranch so they could send help. These early attempts would be all for naught, as the weather would refuse to relent. Food rations were basically non-existent. The cattle that had survived up to this point or hadn't escaped were meager and malnourished, and so like, but butchering them wouldn't yield enough meat, or very little. The poor single men, like all the conscripts and you know, all the working fellas, they had resorted to eating mice they would catch. Like, you'd be out looking for firewood and scare up some small rodent. That's awesome and great if you can catch it, but then occasionally you'd have some other guy fight you for it.
Right.
That's because that shit was going on, because they had to be competitive with that shit, because
trying to eat, man.
when they weren't catching little animals to pop into their mouth, they'd eat strips of buffalo hide they'd pulled from like their already ragged clothing and coverings of shit or whatever.
They were eating their leather clothes. So.
Shit that was made from buffalo pelts. The hide would be boiled down into a gruel. This was something that was made, but the usual application for it was this gray goop that they used as adhesive. It was a glue.
Oh my God.
And this is what their whole body was surviving on. This was the only nutrients.
Wow.
If they didn't catch mice.
Right.
And have you ever tried to catch a fucking mouse?
Yeah, I have. I wasn't successful, so I think I caught it. I can't remember, but we had a snake, and one of the mice was going to feed Jimmy the snake, and the mouse escaped and went under the couch. But I think our dog caught it, and I got.
Well, Franklin Graves continued to observe how dire this situation was, and people were burning up fleeting caloric reserves simply not to freeze to death. Like, your body uses a lot of resources for temperature regulation. Planned to get his people out at all costs. James Reed had been exiled, and George Donner was incapacitated by infection. So Graves saw his call to action here, to step up, and he was the closest thing to a leader that the group had at that point. He came up with this novel idea of crafting snowshoes. I mean, I don't know how experienced these people were with deep snow, but if you're not, it's a bitch if you are, but if you're not, you're really fucked. Graves' group of volunteers would make snowshoes, and they worked. They went out and tested them. They worked well. Graves' team here that would set out to try to reach Johnson's ranch would later be referred to by historians as the Forlorn Hope.
Oh, that's sad.
The Forlorn Hope. If that gives you any idea how things went.
You know, I was really getting my hopes up, thinking about, well, he made the snowshoes and they work. Maybe he's an ingenuitive guy. He's going to succeed.
We'll see. They knew if they set off from here in an earnest effort, there would be no hope for return to camp. They venture out a couple of days. That's the point of no return. Them just leaving and setting off with intent is the event horizon. Like, they either make it and help everybody or they die.
Right, and then everybody dies.
Yeah, and everybody dies. So, no pressure. But they were imperative to everyone's survival.
Right.
The Forlorn Hope had a great asset in a man named Charles Stanton. He had made a similar round trip 3 times already.
Wow.
He's done it. He's been there.
It's like the group going to Vegas in the Stand.
Yeah.
West to the Dark Man's stronghold. You are to leave now, today. You are to take no food, no water, just clothes on your back. God has not seen fit to show me who falls.
When I did the rewatches of the miniseries, I was really getting those vibes from those parts. So we got Stanton, who's more experienced than anyone in his group. And you got the 2 Miwok guides, Luis and Salvador, were along for the ride. So they knew some shit. They took a very minuscule amount of beef because they didn't have any really spare. They carried no tents, nor did they have a change of clothes. So they had clothes on their back and a few supplies. It was only supposed to be a 6-day trip, but the Hope would spend a whole month and a half in those mountains.
Holy
eventually.
Shit. Oh my.
A little preview. They were seen off by a bad omen. Just before they left, a Reed family servant, after being ill for weeks, went mad, acted erratically, and then just died.
I wonder what his problem.
Yeah, so they're starting to see, like, I don't know. I think the doc said he's brushing his teeth too much.
He was like the preacher from Deadwood.
Yeah, he's the preacher from Deadwood.
That's so sad.
Who's also in this Old Stand miniseries at the beginning. He's the soldier that lets the virus out.
He's just fuck up all around.
Yeah,
Isn't he?
well, I mean, they go to bury this guy, and this procedure would be anything but traditional, but it kind of set a precedent for things afterwards, because they buried him, they a standard grave, maybe 6 feet deep or whatever
standard measurement.
whatever they did back then. But it was in the snow. There was no fucking ground that you put the motherfucker
Talk about only worrying about like the now and not the future. Like they're like, well, we don't want to see it. We got to stay here. We don't want to see his body. But like come spring.
Well, people and their beliefs and customs or whatever. I don't know if there was sanctity in putting them underneath or away from everything. But at that point, why would you even fucking bother outside of like arbitrary bullshit? Now I said the snowshoes help, but it was still not going to be easy. You were just going to be able to actually move some. A few had set out without them, real optimistic folks.
Why?
Or slackers.
Couldn't find any material.
So they gave up and returned.
Yeah.
Not all of them, though. Each raising of the knee is a fight in this shit. Even.
Yeah.
So you gotta muster up the will to live with every step. Some were afflicted with snow blindness, and the elevation of the Sierra Nevadas would only exacerbate the effects.
I don't think I saw it. Like, you know how sensitive my eyes are?
Oh, yeah.
Like, bright lights, I can't. I'm super sensitive. And I've been, like, sometimes when it's overcast and snowy and stuff, like, that's worse than just a full-on sunny day. Mm-hmm. It hurts.
Well, Charles Stanton was an adept and experienced traveler, but he was inhibited by his stature. Being recorded as being about 5'6", Stanton had to take more steps and had a harder go in the snow than his counterparts. Being lower to the ground made him more susceptible to snow blindness. Despite all this, he had to be a navigator in unfamiliar territory for the most clueless followers. Luis and Salvador knew the lay of the land, but they had less than a cursory knowledge of this current brilliant path they were on, and also they had a less than cursory grasp on the fucking English language. So there was a huge barrier there.
I'm starting to get a sense why this group is called the Forlorn Hope.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There was some motherfucker back at camp like me that was like, motherfuckers are just going to die cold, hungry, and tired.
Yeah.
I'm going out rested.
Just have a nap in the snow.
So the snowfall had fucked up their plans of following ruts.
They're Hansel and Gretel.
Right. The birds had come by and eaten their breadcrumbs. So they were 3 days into this trip, and they'd only made it 14 miles. They still had 50 to go. Stanton began to lag behind, catching up to the camp at nighttime. 5 days in, the hope would rise to journey forward. Charles Stanton would pop a squat, light up his pipe, and tell the others he would catch up eventually. He would be found 5 months later, having taken shelter in a hollow tree stump nearby the campsite.
So Stanton is you. Like, you know what?
Let me burn one more. I'm getting this.
No, I'll see y'all up there. No. Y'all go ahead. I'll be up there. Yeah, I'll see y'all up there. That motherfucker.
I'll get in this tree trunk.
I don't know how many years on this earth I got left. I'm gonna get real weird with it. Meanwhile, block the wind. I'm gonna roast this bone.
Occasionally, the temperature would rise just so to a more bearable level, but with that, it melted the snow, made shit mushy, and even harder to get.
Luis, snowshoes aren't working in the mud.
Yeah.
So they're all probably barefoot now.
Luis and Salvador were now the de facto leaders. If not for the language barrier, the Miwok duo could express the fact that they were just as lost as the rest of the Forlorn Hope.
So the other guys think that, like, when they're saying stuff and they're like, I think he's saying that we're going to take a left ahead, and they're saying, we are fucked. Yeah. We don't know where we're going. We don't know what the fuck is happening.
We got to lose these white people.
Like, stop following us. We are trying to just go
We got to make it look like an accident.
Like, don't follow us.
We got to get out of here, Luis. I don't even know what a Miwok is. Charles Stanton had made it and hung with him. He could have provided like one of the most crucial directions coming up, because they would have found a place he knew. He was on the right track eventually, I'll say that, because it took them a very long time to get this point. After 6 Mile Valley, the Forlorn Hope would approach a ridge, and Stanton knew that he knew these parts well enough. He knew that if they would put in the work of climbing that ridge, atop the ridge, they would have been able to see Bear Valley, and they would be able to see a road that led to Bear Valley from there, like an actual cleared path, and access that, took it right there. And that road would provide a relatively easy trail to Johnson's ranch and salvation for themselves and the rest of the group back at the lake. Unfortunately, nearby, there was also a downhill route spotted.
Oh, yes.
Over the ridge, the trip would take just a few days longer, and that would bring them to a total of about 9 days. It was a little more than expected, but they would have made it in a lot quicker time, and that would have launched the rescue effort earlier, and it would save a litany of others, and would avoid the more gruesome parts of the story we're about to get into. The Forlorn Hope took the downhill route, pointed them due south into a 3,000-foot deep canyon.
Holy, you're going like a half a mile down into the pin.
Before we venture further on, I'm gonna like talk about the Forlorn Hope Hope and the people that were in it, so I don't have to introduce everybody as much. Exposition dump. The group of people that would prove to be the saving grace here, the Hail Mary pass that would salvage some good from this disaster. Most of them had snowshoes. They were given a blanket or quilt and a ration of food. It included a strip of stringy dried beef, a little coffee, and a little sugar. The group was given one rifle, a few pistols, a hatchet, and tobacco for the men. Only for the men.
Sure. Well, did women go? Are there any women in the Forlorn?
There are. 17 people would take off initially as part of this prototypical Forlorn Hope. The starting roster: Sarah Graves Fosdick, Mary Graves, William Foster, Sarah Foster, Charles Stanton, William Graves Sr., Fiddlin' J. Fosdick, you remember him? Yeah. Mm-hmm. William Murphy, Harriet Pike, Lemuel Murphy, Patrick Dolan, and Luis and Salvador. Amanda McCutcheon, William Eddy, and a hired Mexican herdsman, Antonio, and Carl Dutch Charlie Berger. I guess Carl is kind of a form of Charles, I guess. I don't know. Yeah. Some left because they were able to scrounge up the resources to fashion snowshoes out of ox bows and other refuse. Some were leaving out so that family or children they left behind would eventually be saved, and some were leaving so there would be less people to feed it out. An Irishman bachelor, Patrick Dolan, joined up and quite generously left his ration of stringy beef, half with the Reeds, whose patriarch was exiled, James Reed, and with the Breens and their 7 fucking kids they brought along. Mm-hmm. Dutch Charlie and 10-year-old William Murphy would turn back because they didn't have the proper footwear. But older brother of William, 12-year-old Lemuel Murphy, didn't have any either, but he soldiered on without snowshoes. Well, by December 22nd, the food was no more. So on the 23rd, the real hunger started to set in. Patrick Dolan, now surely regretting his donation of precious beef, suggested an awful raffle. The man who drew the longest strip of paper would be killed and eaten. He would be sacrificed so others may live. It always comes up in these situations.
Does it always come up in these situations?
Yeah, it does. Always.
Okay. Did that one? What sports team was that in the 70s that their plane went down? Did they have to be cannibals?
Alive?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's definitely people.
They ate each other up.
Yeah.
What sport was that? Rugby.
Yeah, rugby or one of those
European.
Yeah. Well, the lottery was actually carried out. Ironically, Pat Dolan drew that long piece. However, no one had it in them to carry out tasks yet when the time came. William Eddy, who had earlier suggested a duel to the death to decide who was eaten, realized something pretty macabre. Mm-hmm. He said that he had a lucid moment in his crazed hunger and exhaustion. He explained to the rest of the group that very soon one of them would simply drop dead anyway, and they could eat that person, no murder necessary.
You're wrong.
And patience is a virtue. That's what my mother tells me. I don't know what the take is, but that's what she tells me. Charles Stanton had spoken enough while he was with the group for others to build an idea about what the landscape would look like on the road to Johnson's ranch. And though they didn't know where they were, they could tell by their surroundings that they had made a major wrong turn. But they couldn't fathom when or where that erroneous turn had been made.
So they
knew enough about where they were going and the route taken that they didn't know where they were, but they knew for fuck's sure they weren't in the right place.
Maybe it was back when you decided to go down this steep ass hill as opposed to the other path that would take you up.
Did they not have compasses or any shit like that?
Yeah, for real.
They fucking had to. Or one map.
They've got to have somebody that can at least read a map and have
or fuck a piece of wood carved into the shape of the state to we've been going this way, this fucking knot in the wood. So, naturally energy was very low among this group.
Right.
Sometimes they didn't have the energy to move the camp they set up yesterday. Imagine a couple mulligans were taken where everybody woke up and we'll start again tomorrow. They barely mustered up the strength to progress at all, and they didn't really know if they were going the right way, so they didn't have the confidence in it. Right. From here, things would get even more dire, and I feel like I've said that a million times.
Yeah, because the story just gets worse and worse. Yeah. It is a shit snowball that is just rolling downhill, and it's broken off, and you've got 2 shit snowballs rolling downhill.
You know what a shit barometer is, Bob? Measures the shit pressure in the air. You can feel it. Hear that? Sounds of the whispering winds of shit. Friend, when the old shit barometer rises, and you'll feel it too. Ears will implode from the shit pressure. Beware, my friend. Shit winds are a-coming.
Because you still got the group that's back there at Donner Lake.
Yeah, we have no idea what's going on there. While they huddled around the fire at night, which became customary on this trip,
I bet you mean huddled.
Antonio, the Mexican herdsman I mentioned earlier, he died. And he died sitting alongside all the other members of the Hope. No one knew until his limp arm fell into the fire, burning his hand badly.
And I bet
Just
it
began
smelled
cooking his
fucking
hand.
delicious.
Yeah.
And they all just went nuts.
But they didn't let themselves get crazy here.
Oh,
but
okay.
they saw like his hand is in the fire burning. He wasn't withdrawing it. And the horror of it became apparent. They dragged him out of it. Well, one day someone was out cutting wood using the hatchet.
You're Pappy.
Somebody's out cutting firewood. On the backswing, the business end of the fucking axe flew off into the woods, into a snowbank or somewhere. It was never recovered. Chopping wood was out of the question. The group would make shelter out of the only resources they had, themselves. A human tent would be made, and body walls, and a blanket roof, and body heat just traded. That's all they had.
It's just a pile of gross, stinky people.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
And
yeah.
how do they decide who's on top and who's on bottom? Oh my god.
Dutch
this is a
oven
Dutch oven.
under a
bit, 'cause they're all-
blanket. With
They
just
have no control over their bodily functions anymore. They're just
Just
farting
go,
and
man.
pissing, and they're just all a big pile of gross.
the cold was still way too much, and death would claim a pretty unlikely victim. I thought. I didn't really get his age, but like, yeah, I figured this guy would make it a little bit longer. But then you had guys like Stanton that tapped out early. Now the Forlorn Hope had set out under Franklin Graves' leadership, so this was our guy that stepped up in the story. He saw the need.
Did he make the snowshoes? Was it him that made the snowshoes?
It was his idea.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, he spearheaded this last ditch effort shit here. But matters of nature's not cruel.
Nature's indifferent.
It's indifferent. And it's certainly not a meritocracy.
No.
So, the horde winner would claim Franklin Graves.
Well, maybe he was one that like volunteered to be on top of the dog pile.
Yeah, he was really stepping up. He would ultimately succumb to hypothermia, but hypothermia was not included in the lexicon of the Donner Party. Being, this is ape brain, reptile brain shit. So everyone blamed his death on hunger, including himself when he was dying. He thought he was dying of hunger.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like he wasn't thinking he was dying because his body couldn't regulate heat anymore. Because he was just as much as everybody else under the impression that his demise came from an empty stomach.
Right. They didn't understand.
A growly tummy killed him.
Your organs shutting down from hypothermia and stuff. And
Graves implored his daughters to eat the physical husk he left for once he shuffled off this mortal coil.
Ooh.
So like he knew he was dying. He was like, y'all gotta eat. He was like, that's the only way. He wasn't being like crazy poetic or dramatic or
No,
anything.
it's
He's like, I'm dying, and like I'm gonna be the only nutrition.
Yeah, he's being logical and practical.
Hypothermia would descend upon Patrick Dolan.
Oh, he thought he was going to get out of it.
Right. He would exhibit one of the freakiest symptoms of its brutal final stages. There's a behavior shown in some hypothermia sufferers known as paradoxical undressing. When one gets super cold and hypothermia starts setting in, the blood vessels constrict and it starts holding all the heat towards the body's core. And towards the end of the condition, and it just running its course and saying, fuck it, the body just opens up all those blood vessels. The sudden rush of heated blood goes all over the body, and the person will get the sensation that they're overheated.
Yeah, it's like all of your blood, it's like your body realizes like, oh no, the extremities are dying.
Right.
And like frostbite, and like we better send some blood that way.
They start shedding garments despite the cold conditions that gave them the hypothermia in the first place. This is common enough that like sometimes law enforcement initially mistake urban cases of hypothermia, which is awful that still happens today.
Oh, that's really
but
sad.
like the victims are misidentified as victims of sexual assault because of their being found in random states of
they're naked.
undress.
Yeah, they're getting-
It's believed that about half of the victims do this.
Wow.
So,
Isn't that the Diet Love Pass? Wasn't that one of the
yes.
series? I can't remember what
The Yatlov Pass. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I can't even see the spelling in my head right now. I don't know where that Y is, and it always
Yeah,
fucks
I
with
don't
me.
know either. Been like not breaking the case, but like new findings in the last year or two, I think. So.
And plus, it's in Russia, which makes it inherently more fucking scary.
Oh yeah, and a lot of the theories on what happened are very, very, very scary.
But we won't go into that here. That's for a later date. birthday.
We digress.
When I get around to writing that one. So Christmas Day, 1846 rolls around, and Dolan begins to exhibit this manic behavior. Despite the attempts of the rest, Dolan would escape the human tent. He was exhibiting another symptom, which is referred to as terminal burrowing or hide and die. Dolan disappeared into the blizzard. He would return, but he would immediately drop dead.
Wow, that's really bizarre.
He exhibits 2 acts of dying dogs that is observed, where an old dog will go out alone out in the woods to die alone. But also, we've had pets disappear for a long time, my family and I, and then they come back just to die.
Yeah.
The rest of the Hope are on the brink of actual starvation at this point, besides the hypothermia. But their bodies are eating themselves. Their livers are starting to break down and release acetone. So, like, when they're under the blanket, they're breathing breath that smells like nail polish remover in each other's faces. As hungry turns to starving, hunger pains will get worse in inverse correlation with glucose levels. About 36 hours into the state of starvation, the hunger pains, just when they get their most severe, completely cessate. Like, they go, okay, we are handling all nutrition internally now. The body switches tracks and it starts eating itself, basically, muscle and fat. It'll put itself back on a regular track once you start eating again and getting outside nourishment, and then your metabolism will kick right back into high gear. It's a design flaw in the human body, and the hunger pains will return with such ferocity that could cause madness, and more on that later. Also, there's a condition called refeeding syndrome, and it can occur because of this abrupt shift. Causes a lot of electrolyte problems and metabolic stuff, and it's fatal, as we've seen in Holocaust victims after their liberations from concentration camps. And so, like, a lot of bad stuff can happen because you're starving, but like, it still can be bad once you start eating again.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've seen movies where something like that happens, like you eat again and then they get really sick, and
Lemuel Murphy, who, as you remember, set off without snowshoes and persevered, he had turned 13 during this expedition. So Christmas is his birthday, everything. He was out gathering firewood when he spooked up a mouse. He would capture the little critter and he popped it into his mouth all furry and wriggling, and he just chewed and ate it alive. I know people could eat more shit back then, but like, that would be a feat to eat a fucking live mouse. You'd have to be hungry, and he was.
That makes me think of that French guy.
A little particle of nutrition fell into his belly and began being rapidly absorbed, and this kicked Murphy's metabolism back into high gear. This was enough to turn the new teen crazed. He had to be restrained and calmed down as he bit the arms of his partner, screaming, "Give me my bone!" over and over again. Give me my bone. He was sat down by the fire. Once he was subdued, he would later die in the middle of the night. So if you're keeping count, the camp now had 4 corpses laying about it. On the brink of death from starvation, the Forlorn Hope had no other choice, ushering in the darkest chapters of our tale. The group would remove the heads, hands, and feet of the cold cadavers before they got into the nitty-gritty of the harvest. This is a common practice among cannibalistic societies, as it dehumanizes the carcass, makes the process easier, makes it similar to large game.
Yeah, I mean, you don't dress a deer with its head still on.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, the way you field dress stuff, you get rid of that stuff first sometimes in the process, but also, like, you don't cut the deer's head off immediately.
No.
But, like, if instead of the deer's head, it was this guy you knew that was moving around just hours earlier, it'd be a little bit harder to carve him up when he's gawking at you.
Yeah, I was just saying that, even if they were dressing an animal, once you start butchering the animal, you take its head off first.
Right. But they did that first.
Right.
No human hands and feet, no human head, just a carcass.
It was a dual purpose.
It's just meat then, anyway.
Yes, their eternal spirits had already gone off to whatever land eternal spirits go.
Of comforting make-believe. Having marched and starved for months, the bodies only provided sparse amounts of muscle. Opting for high iron organ meats, the group would cut out the hearts, livers, and kidneys. Still very disinclined, they placed the meat on steaks. They were careful to group up based on who would eat what, so no one had to eat their own family. I mean, it would make a difference for some people. Yeah. The steaks of flesh were held to the flame. The smell of the meat cooking rivaled that of beef or pork. The aroma of browning flesh made the group salivate, almost going ravenous and mad from the hunger and anticipation of eating it. Luis and Salvador, unsurprisingly seeing this act as taboo, abstained from the feeding in quiet horror.
Yeah, they probably had some religious beliefs that's like, this is how demons are made or something.
The rest sat eating while openly weeping and trying not to look each other in the For anyone to survive at this point, sadly enough, like, cannibalism was imperative. It was necessary in this situation. So I can't sit back all, warm and recently fed talking about how could they fucking eat another person. I mean, I'm not starving right now. I can't.
Yeah.
So I can't look. You can't judge these people as much as you want to.
I don't understand how anyone could judge this, honestly.
Right.
I mean, seeing it as taboo
Social
because it's
norms.
a religious thing. This isn't a society we're familiar with. This is something that's happening completely outside realm of possibility.
I think humans have like a stronger brand of oxytocin or something like that like makes us more inclined under normal mental function to preserve life and take care of others, whereas like other animals, other mammals have that, but like also like everybody has a story, or at least has heard a story about a pet or animals that eat a couple of their offspring whenever they have them because
Right.
because they have different priorities than we do. So, but shit starts changing once you get in certain situations, and we'll see that.
I'm not a proponent for cannibalism, but I'm just saying in this situation, I don't see how anyone could fault them for doing this.
I'm just saying I can see their point eating other people, and I can see their point being adverse to eating other people.
Yeah.
Nobody.
Yes, and that's right.
Yeah.
It's like I don't know what I would do, so I have no judgment towards this because I don't know what I would do. I don't know if I could, or if I would, or if I'd be first in line, or if I'd be one sitting there crying while I'm eating.
Yeah, we don't know what we would have did. We weren't there.
Right.
That's why you got to look at a lot of things in history or stories.
And that's why I say I don't understand why anyone would judge that I don't understand why anyone wouldn't do this.
Well,
I can understand why.
It goes into us judging our own intent versus other people's just outward behavior. Yeah. We don't know what anybody else is going through, and other cliches, walking in shoes of others. A little luck would befall the Forlorn Hope. The snow stopped, the temperature dropped, and the ground would be hard, and it made it for much easier foot slog. They would strip the remaining muscle from the dead comrades and make jerky because they had a still weeks-long trip ahead. They had no idea how much longer they had, but they needed road snacks. The meat harvested would only keep them fed for 4 days. Now, while I could believe that these corpses are largely bereft of muscle at this point, they'd been eating themselves already, so like also not skilled human butchers, so like they're not getting all the meat. They're not really scouring it. The source that I used primarily for this writing is a book called The Indifferent Stars Above. It's about the Donner Party and other wagon trail shit back then. Really detailed, a lot more detailed than what I'm giving you here, but by a man named Daniel James Brown. And Brown professes that Franklin Graves alone, based on the available stats and averages of that time in history, he surmised that Graves alone should have yielded at least 66 pounds of meat with organs and muscle and all that. I have no idea how educated that guess is, but it frightens me and concerns me a little bit. But I applaud his precision with about how much.
I'm sure he
and the thought and research that went into that figure.
He probably did know how tall he was, and that he probably just knows there's some formula of this tall average man weighs approximately this much, human skeleton weighs this much is
he applied him to an algorithm. Before they knew it, they were out of food again, so they started eating their shoes. That's a normal trope in these stories. They would have to proceed barefooted though. They've eaten their shoes.
Seems very
it seems like a big oversight for me, but then again, to eat your shoes after eating a person, I figured I don't know, maybe they were thinking about it like, we gotta eat these people, I'm not fucking walking barefooted in the snow. Well, their clothes were all like threadbare and wet rotted and shit like that, so like they're wearing rags, and the temperatures dipped into the teens. It wasn't long into the proposal of cold-blooded murder was brought to the table again. It was William Foster that would bring the idea of murdering Luis and Salvador.
Wow.
And this is more me and mine behavior, and if you gotta eat a person, you'd rather it be a stranger than somebody you knew and like real familiar with, probably really bonding with Luis and Salvador.
They were Mexicans and they didn't talk like them, and I think William Foster's just a big ass racist.
They were Miwoks.
Oh, I thought you said, Antonio was the Mexican.
Yeah, Antonio was Mexican. These guys were Miwoks. I'd seen places where they were attributed to other tribes, but Miwok is what I found most of the time.
Regardless, they're not white, and so it's easier. We can eat them because they're not like us.
And they're also, for all intents and purposes, invading their homeland. But we won't get into that. That covers too much of American history. Well, the group hated the idea, so I guess some people people were bonding with the Miwoks, especially William Eddy. The next morning, the group awoke to find that Luis and Salvador had split. They could have overheard the prospect suggested by Foster, or they could have been tipped off by Eddie or one of the others.
They were like at their little camp, not as close to the other guys, and they're like, do they think we can't hear them? Like, holy shit! So they're gonna eat it? What the hell? Like, you gotta get out of here, man! Like, we just came behind this tree to take a piss.
All over there whispering,
yeah.
But like with the projection of like an over enthusiastic improv performer.
Yeah.
Oh.
You got Wayne Brady talking about. First, we're gonna whack him over the head. Then we're gonna butcher him.
Going through the Wasatches with "Ain't no mountain high." Fuck. As they haphazardly headed south, the Forlorn Hope found themselves below the snow line, and this meant the possibility of encountering wild game. So some things are getting better. The group split up and began to hunt, all Scooby-Doo style, groups of two. William Eddy and Mary Graves happened upon a deer. Eddy exerted what little energy he had left, lifting the flintlock rifle, and put the deer in the archaic sights. The hunting couple would follow the trail of blood. They would find the deer downed and in its death throes. William slit the dying animal's throat, and the pair would both take knees beside it and take greedy gulps from the blood coming from the slice.
Yeah.
And can your body process blood like that?
No, you'll throw it up.
So they're quenched, so they drag this fucking animal back down. The other hunting group's luck would tend towards the negative compared with that of the Eddy Graves duo. Sarah Graves and her new husband, none other than Fiddlin' J. Foss, which would keep the trail jaunty with music through Nebraska. So these two were paired up in the hunting effort. Exhausted and depleted, Jay killed over during the hunt.
Aw, dang.
He would fiddle no more.
That's really sad. I mean, I don't know what was better, keeping up the morale of the camp with his, uplifting fiddle tunes, or feeding them for a few days.
Let's bring up a kill count infographic here. Another tally. The Forlorn Hope effort had taken both a father and husband from Sarah Graves at this point now. The Fosters, empty-handed from hunting, came upon the heartbroken Sarah. She told them of the news. The Fosters barely let Sarah finish her sentence before asking if they could feast on Jay.
At least they asked, I guess.
She gave her blessing as she believed Jay was no longer aboard the vessel, and the Fosters butchered him on the spot.
Damn.
Like they went to work like before she'd walked off. Like they just had at it. They took his limbs and torso upon their backs and hauled him in pieces back to camp. That is some Texas Chainsaw Massacre shit.
Well, yeah, it is.
Despite William Eddy and Mary Graves' bounty of venison, William and Sarah Foster roasted Fosdick's heart on a steak and ate it while the others had deer.
I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say they had developed a taste for the long pig. Too enthusiastic about that.
So the Hope's rank had shrunk from 17 now down to 7.
Yeah.
There were 5 women and 2 men. The group had bottomed out in that canyon and began to have their feet ravaged by sharp, shitty rocks.
Oh, damn.
so they're getting the worst part of every hardship.
If I didn't have kids and I was Sarah Fosdick, I would probably just be like, go ahead and take me too. Like, I am not doing this anymore.
I don't have any figures on. There's too many people in the story and their ages and stuff like that, so I didn't put in the due diligence. And I'm sorry, but I don't know anybody's ages. But I imagine Sarah Graves was like a younger bride. I don't know in this situation when you think about people getting married in this age, that Sarah Graves could have been 14 fucking years old for all I know.
And he's like, I'm imagining him like a grubby old prospector playing the fiddle, like with no teeth and like yee.
Fucking Will Ferrell, Gus Chiggins, or fucking Tom Waits' character in the Ballad of Buster Scruggs.
Yeah. Only more over the top. Because he played the fiddle. He was a dancing little fiddler guy.
Well, William Foster would suggest murder again. He thought that the next meal should come by Amanda McCutcheon.
Grocery shopping?
Yeah,
he's just like, out which one.
He's already got like the hierarchy of like.
He's got his menu planned out.
He's gonna
like,
eat. Yeah, he's meal planning at this point. God. William Eddy declined him on principle, and because she had children left behind, and Foster threw some sales pitch and shit on it, like she's only got 2 kids, she doesn't have a husband, she does no other family on this trip, and some accounts say that William Eddy threatened him at gunpoint or threatened him, but I don't imagine William Eddy was doing any kind of fucking frat boy arm swinging grandstanding or anything. He may have just showed him a weapon and said, no, just stop.
Yeah, right.
Don't, just fuck off on it. Drop. Later, William Foster would suggest both Graves sisters. And, he's going back going, they've already lost their dad.
Yeah.
Sarah lost her husband. He's like, they're both childless, fatherless, and one's a fucking widow.
Yeah.
Hey, come on, man. You used to be cool. Now, I told you this kind of hunger and, actually going through with it and breaking that seal and eating a person will change you on a mental level.
That which you have just eaten, that which your teeth have just torn apart, your taste buds have savored, that was human meat.
It won't turn you into a Wendigo, but maybe the Wendigo was based on what eating other people did to a person, outside of like maybe the bronze diseases and stuff that come from it. This is called anthropophagy. Rather than the mind just viewing eating flesh as a terrible necessity, it actually switches gears at one point and you start actually craving human flesh. It's not like a supernatural, the hunger situation or anything like that, but like, you view people as food. I mean, it's a food source.
But
your
the
brain's
fact
like,
that it was,
I ate that once and you can eat that again.
The fact that it was husband and wife, though, it sounds like it was probably that for one of them, and then it was like the folie à deux or whatever.
Folie à deux.
Folie à deux, where
That's what the next Joker movie with Lady Gaga is called. A mania or a psychosis of two individuals sharing it.
A madness of two, I think is the translation. But so one of them probably, because what are the odds that the only two people in the group so far that have become like full-on cannibals because they want to be are husband and wife?
Yeah, and that bitch is whispering in his ear. Say, offer up Luis and Salvador. Nobody likes them, they're brown.
Wow, okay, so it was all the woman doing it. Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
that's what, actually, when I wrote this thing, I said something about her being a harpy and like putting her husband up to shit and like having him take the heat, but it was really her idea.
Where was your basis on this?
I pointed it out that it was baseless speculation, but I still wanted to be misogynistic.
Right.
I want to be informative, but I still want to have my prejudices. You'd be surprised just how quickly humans can turn feral and get into this frame of mind. You've heard people say like the only thing between the United States and a revolt is like 3 missed meals or some shit like that. Like if they starved us for like a day, we would fucking lose our shit. Yeah. But if you need like more real, authentic examples from recent times, Google Russia 1920s famine.
Yeah, don't look at the images.
No, I mean, don't Google this if you don't want to hear or see about this, because the particular image I'm thinking about will probably pop up. If you want to see that, Google that. For the chickens and pussies out there that aren't going to do it, or the reasonable, rational humans.
Yeah, people who just don't want to see this.
That aren't me, that aren't going to look at horrible shit like that. Don't Google it, but I'll describe it briefly. You'll see two very haggard, grizzled Russian citizens, a man and a woman, a couple, very bundled up because it's Russia, and they have a table out, which is a meat display that has some very terrible items for sale. Very, very identifiable pieces of children and others. So, but it differs from society, social norms, and all those other factors. Results aren't typical for humans. How you're going to act, you don't know. That's why I go back, kind of hold your judgments. So some folks, like the Fosters, just turn quicker, I guess. So we come to another account that is murky, to say the least. I had to do a lot of cross-referencing with very little roots for my efforts on this one, but this account I can't get anything concrete, so you can come to your own conclusions on this one and blame who you want. The Forlorn Hope, as they told it, would stumble upon two familiar faces, two former members even. As the story goes, the group ran into Luis and Salvador. The Miwoks, hopeless and dying, were done a mercy by way of one to the head each from Foster's flintlock rifle. Luis and Salvador were apt, and they knew the lay of the land. They knew the kind of things you'd run into out there. They would have been all right, I think, if they'd never run into the Donner Party, or if they escaped from the Donner Party earlier enough. I think they would have been okay.
Right, if they wouldn't have been snuck up on by this crazy fucker, and
they're much more fit from a lifestyle of like being migratory, and
they were more suited to surviving in the wilderness than anyone else.
It's just speculation, but like a lot of people lean towards Foster just murdered. Foster found them, or they found them, and Foster murdered them.
Just snuck up up on them. They're probably asleep or just had their backs turned, whatever. But
I just figure Foster would have been the trigger man, because even though others wanted to eat him too, he was the one that brought it up. You got to do the deed when the time comes. You make the judgment. You swing the sword, motherfucker.
I kind of assumed he found them on his own, like not with the group. Like he was out scouting or hunting, and he came across them, and then he came back and was like, "Oh man, guys, they were dying, and they begged me to kill them."
Or he just had dropped all pretense and was like, "I found Luis Salvador," munching on his arm, and everybody just like kept his secret for him. Two Miwok guides who gave him so much help and had been companions to them.
They had gotten away.
Thought they got away. They had their organs eaten and their flesh dehydrated into Miwok jerky. Well, they'd run into a little luck, and they run into some Maidu Indians. The tribe would take them in just 2 days after they butchered and fed on a couple of Miwoks, which were an ally tribe to the Maidus. They may have known them. Who knows?
Yeah, right.
They may have traded with them and all that. They still had pieces of Luis and Salvador in their meager luggage. They wisely did not divulge this information. The Maidu children cried from fright upon seeing the gaunt, shuffling, bloody zombie people that the survivors had become. The remaining members of the Forlorn Hope would get some much-needed rest at the Maidu camp after they were fed a paste made from pine nuts, grass, and acorns. So that was probably not very satisfying or even nutritional, but like a safe and slow introduction of regular food back into the diet.
I guess so.
And probably wouldn't give you refeeding syndrome. After resting, the Forlorn Hope would set out on the home stretch for Johnson's Ranch. They still wore rags that just hung about their emaciated bodies. They were still shoeless, and as they set out the trail, cordially greeted them with a torrential downpour. They had been fed and rested, but it wasn't enough. They hadn't recovered in any profound fashion.
No, there's no way they
One meal and a night's sleep isn't going to fix that shit. Cold and wet in their bodies were just quitting on them. Like they would walk 100 yards and then rest, and then the rest took longer than the walk, and they repeated this process for 2 miles, and that's when 6 of their bodies completely gave out. Kill switch, like you got to stop or you're going to die this moment. So they had to sit it out. Only one member of the Forlorn Hope would keep on going, William Eddy. Eddie would make it to Johnson's Ranch. He told the people there about the other 6 before he was laid in a warm bed. The ranchers would make short work of the rescue of the others. Just like William Eddy tracking the deer he shot, the ranchers to the rescue followed Eddie's bloody footprints back to the remaining 6 of the Forlorn Hope. Shoeless, bloody feet were leaving red beacons in the snow to lead him back. 17 would set out on the Forlorn Hope, and 7 would make it to the actual destination. So the supposed 6-day journey took the group a month and a half. So the rescue missions could go out and start getting the rest left back, snowbound at Truckee Lake and the other location. Better late than never, right? Well, not exactly. It might have been better that nobody ever went and witnessed.
Better for them, better for the rescued group.
Well, had they went the right way and made it in under 10 days, Truckee Lake would not have turned into an absolute horror show, because things had gotten bad back at the temporary homestead. But we'll get back into that on the next one, or we will go to the main course, because you ain't seen nothing yet.
And you thought...
Baby. Bachman Turner Overdrive? Yeah.
I got
Speech impediments.
I got it. I thought it was hilarious.
Just in case you hadn't heard that song.
I heard it. I got it.
Just living, you hear at least 100 times, not even pursuing it.
You are so funny.
I guess next one's going to be the last one. You're going to find out what the rest of the gang's been on to back at Truckee Lake and the Donners camp. We'll hear more from James Reed. He's going to come back like a shining knight at the end of the story, full hero's art. We'll hear about our old buddies William, Eddy, and Foster, and what they get up to whenever they get to the place they're going to, because they survived, and what some of the other survivors get into after their life, and all the fun adventures of the rescue efforts, because there's several, and they get more and more horrific accounts the more gets sent out there, because it's like, we'll get into it, I won't go into too much detail here, but like when they first start saving people, things are already bad. You remember that before another relief effort come, people were left behind there, and things just continued business as usual after those people left. So, but we'll see how that goes. We've seen a bunch of pretty crazy, gory, wacky shit happen so far, but buckle up, because it's it's getting worse. It's certainly not stopping.
Yeah, it's horrible.
But it's history. We'll see you next time. We'll see you down that dusty trail, the Donner Trail, when we wrap it up. See y'all. You've been listening to a One More Mosh Pit production made possible by listeners like you and Manic Nervous Energy. I'm not going to list everywhere we're at because basically if you search for us there, you'll find us there. We're on every platform for podcast or videos. We're on YouTube now. So I make videos whenever I feel like it. This whole thing may be going full video pretty soon. I don't know how much longer we got with this podcast, but I'm going to get real weird with it. If you liked what you heard here today, tell your friends, tell everyone. If you didn't like what you heard here today, you keep your whore mouth shut. One More Mosh Pit music written and performed by Blake Foster. Check him out with his band, Chainsaw Lassie.